Let me tell you something they never warn you about betrayal. It doesn't always arrive as a bomb. Sometimes it arrives as pot roast, as a Sunday dinner table, as your mother's voice, calm and certain, telling you something about your own life as if she'd already filed the paperwork and you just hadn't been notified yet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat there with a fork in my hand at my parents' Sunday table, knowing the house I'd bought with my own money was about to be treated like family property. And my mother told me, without flinching, that my brother was moving in. Not asking, not suggesting, telling. And the most shocking part? She wasn't wrong to assume I'd go along with it, because I always had. My name is Nadia. I'm 34 years old, and I was the useful one, the responsible one, the daughter who figured things out and never made it anyone else's problem. For decades, I had been the support beam of a family that never once acknowledged the weight I was carrying, cheated of my autonomy so quietly that I had started to mistake compliance for character. I had been lied to by assumption, humiliated by love, shamed into smallness by a family that called it devotion. The truth is, I had participated in my own extraction, and the Wayfair link my mother sent me on a Tuesday, a bed frame for my brother for my room, was the moment I finally saw the whole system for exactly what it was. What happened next wasn't a fight. There were no screams, no ultimatums, no dramatic exit through a front door with bags packed and a speech prepared. What happened next was precise. It was quiet. It was strategic. It was the kind of payback that doesn't announce itself until it's already done, until you're sitting across a pot roast at the next Sunday dinner and dropping 2 sentences that change everything and cannot be taken back. I made a move they could never undo. The vengeance I chose wasn't loud. It was legal. And justice, as I was about to discover, is most complete when it comes stamped by a notary. My mom didn't ask. She announced. That dinner didn't just come with an announcement, it came with a plan. Patricia outlined a timeline before the pot roast had even cooled. Robert, my dad, nodded along like it was a board meeting agenda, confirming weekends, logistics, dates. Caleb wasn't there that night, but his absence made it worse, like the decision was so settled, so obvious, that he didn't even need to show up to claim his prize. I kept my face still and watched it unfold, fork in hand, the steam still rising from the dish. Caleb, my golden child brother who had never once been told no by anyone in our family, the one who, at 31 years old, still somehow managed to be everyone's project and everyone's priority at the same time. My mom, Patricia, spoke about him with this soft, careful tone, like he was made of something fragile, something precious that needed to be protected from the world. And me? I was just the logistics, the person who figured things out, the one who made it work. I sat there watching her talk about his situation with so much tenderness, while I was being assigned a decision I never made. The betrayal in that moment wasn't loud. That's what gets me the most when I think back to it. There were no raised voices, no dramatic accusations, nothing cinematic about it at all. It was casual. It was pot roast and family drama served on the same plate, and Patricia just expected me to swallow both. She talked about Caleb's rough patch like it was a minor inconvenience, like my house was simply the most obvious solution, the way you'd suggest adding more salt to fix a bland dish. I sat there nodding, and I hated myself for it. I had built that house dollar by dollar. Every single cent of it was mine. 3 years of overtime, skipped vacations, a car that rattled every time I hit 40 miles an hour. All of it so I could have one thing in this world that was truly, completely mine. My house in Portland was my proof. It was my quiet revolution against every year I'd spent being the useful one, the responsible one, the one who never needed anything because she was too busy making sure everyone else had everything. And now it was being donated to my brother over pot roast on a Sunday. The family drama that unfolded in the next few minutes was almost beautiful in its efficiency. Patricia outlined every detail with the calm confidence of someone who had already rehearsed this. Robert kept nodding, filling in the gaps. By Monday, Caleb was texting like the move-in date was already set, coordinating which of his boxes from the garage he wanted first, asking about parking, treating my home like a logistics problem he was graciously helping to solve. I looked around that table and realized something cold and sharp. I had been lied to my entire life. Not with words, with assumptions. And nobody had noticed. Not even me. Not yet. To understand what happened at that dinner table, you have to understand something that took me years, actual painful years, to see clearly. My family had a system. It wasn't written down anywhere, nobody ever said it out loud, but it was as real and as functional as any contract I've ever signed. Caleb was the dreamer, the one with potential, the one who needed room to breathe and space to become. And I was the infrastructure, the thing that held everything up so the rest of the building could look beautiful. I was the scapegoat, and I had been playing that role so long, I'd started to think it was just my personality. It started small, the way these things always do. The first time was the car. I'd just bought a used Honda, nothing fancy, but it ran. Caleb needed to get to a job interview 2 hours away, and before I even had a chance to think about it, Patricia had volunteered my car without asking me. I remember feeling a weird flicker of discomfort, but I let it go. It was family, right? That's what you do. What I didn't see then was that the moment I let it go, I taught everyone in that house exactly how much I could be moved without pushing back. The system filed that information away and used it. Then came the boxes. Caleb was between apartments, which, looking back, was a pattern that repeated itself with suspicious regularity. And my garage became a temporary storage unit. Temporary turned into 14 months. 14 months of navigating around someone else's life while they lived rent-free in my space, my air, my square footage. I never said a word. I stepped over the boxes. I parked on the street. I smiled at Sunday dinners and answered questions about how things were going as if none of it was happening. That's what the system needed from me, and I delivered every single time. The money was next. Never a big amount. That's how it worked. Always just small enough to feel petty to complain about. $30 here, a tank of gas there, a grocery run that somehow became my bill. Patricia would say, "You know how tight things are for Caleb right now." And the sentence would just hang there, heavy with the unspoken expectation that I would absorb it with equal grace. Family betrayal doesn't always look like a knife in the back. Sometimes it looks like 100 tiny paper cuts that everyone pretends aren't bleeding. And the humiliation of it was that I let it happen, because I had been taught that asking for anything in return made me the selfish one. Every small yes I gave was a brick in a wall I was building around myself. A wall that made it easier and easier for the system to assume my compliance, my silence, my resources. I had been groomed, not with malice maybe, but with extraordinary effectiveness, to be the person who absorbed the overflow of everyone else's chaos without producing any of her own. And by the time Patricia sat across from me and told me Caleb was moving into my house, she wasn't being cruel. She was just following the logic of a system I had helped build. That's the part that stung the most, and something was about to break it wide open. I want to tell you about the moment everything changed. Not the dinner, that was the announcement. The moment I'm talking about was smaller, quieter, and somehow 10 times more devastating. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting in my kitchen eating lunch when my phone buzzed. It was Patricia. I opened the message expecting something normal, and there it was. A Wayfair link, a bed frame, queen size, mid-range price, and the note underneath it said, "Saw this for Caleb's room. What do you think?" Not, "Should we?" Not, "Would you be okay with?" "What do you think?" Like the room was already his and my only remaining job was to have an opinion on the furniture. I stared at that screen for a long time. The kind of staring where you're not really seeing anymore. where your eyes are fixed on something while your brain is doing something much louder in the background. I couldn't believe it. I had half expected some follow-up from the Sunday dinner, but seeing it laid out like that, a product link, a casual assumption that my bedroom was now a showroom floor, it hit differently. It hit surgical, because that link wasn't a question. It was a flag being planted. The room in question was my second bedroom. The one I had painted myself. The one with the window that caught the afternoon light perfectly. The one I used as a reading room where I kept my books and my silence and my peace. That room was the one place in the world that was completely mine in the way that only quiet spaces can be yours. Not legally, not on paper, but spiritually. And now Patricia was sending me furniture links for it. The annexation wasn't coming anymore. It had already arrived. And the shocking part wasn't the audacity. It was how normal it felt to her. I put my phone face down on the counter. I looked at my kitchen, my walls, the coffee mug with the chip on the handle that I'd kept for 3 years because it was comfortable. I looked at all of it and I thought, this is the last time I get to be surprised by this family. That thought, clean, cold, and perfectly sharp, was not rage. Rage is loud and wild, and it makes mistakes. This was something else. This was clarity. The kind that only comes when the thing you've been avoiding looking at finally walks right up to your face and refuses to blink. I had been cheated. Not of money. Of the right to exist undisturbed in my own life. The Wayfair link was still sitting in my messages. I didn't respond. Not that day, not that night. I let it sit there, unanswered, while something shifted inside me so completely that I almost didn't recognize myself. I had spent 34 years learning how to accommodate, how to be useful, how to make myself smaller so everyone around me had more room. But there's a threshold. There's always a threshold, and every person has one. The moment the system asks for one thing too many. For me, it was a bed frame on a Tuesday. That was Tuesday. By the following Thursday, the house was already under contract, and what I did next was something nobody in that family saw coming. I called my friend Simone the same night. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I just talked, flat and clear, like I was reading from a document I'd written in my head while staring at that phone screen. I told her about the dinner, the link, Patricia's tone, the boxes in the garage that had been there for over a year. Simone, who had survived her own family implosion 2 years earlier and come out the other side with language for all of it, listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds, and then she said, "Nadia, this isn't a difficult family. This is a parasitic system, and you are the host." That word, parasitic, cracked something open. I had heard the terms before, scattered through articles and podcasts I'd half listened to. Golden child, identified patient, family scapegoat, systemic extraction. But hearing Simone say it plainly, without drama, without softening it for my comfort, made it real in a way it had never been before. She wasn't diagnosing me. She was naming what I had been living inside of. And the moment something gets named, it loses a little of its power over you. I could feel it happening in real time. The shame started to lift, just slightly, like a window cracking open in a room that hadn't had air in years. The problem, Simone said, isn't that they're going to push back if you say no. The problem is that they've built an entire emotional architecture around the idea that your no can be negotiated. She was right. I had said versions of no before. Soft no's, apologetic no's, no's disguised as, "Let me think about it," or, "I'm not sure that works for me right now." And every single time, the system had found a way around it. Guilt, persistence, reframing my boundaries as selfishness, or simply moving forward as though I hadn't spoken at all. The lied-to person can say no 100 times if the system doesn't believe the no is final. The only move that actually works, Simone said, is something irreversible. Something guilt can't negotiate. Something that exists in the real world, on paper, beyond feelings. I wrote that down. I got up, found a pen, and wrote it on the back of an envelope sitting on my counter. Irreversible. Real world. On paper. Because she was right. Every time I had tried to handle this with conversations, with explanations, with emotional arguments about fairness or dignity, it had gone nowhere. Words were too easy to reframe. But facts had a way of being immune to interpretation. We talked for 2 more hours. By the time I put down the phone, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was strategic. There's a version of payback that looks like a fight, screaming at a dinner table, dramatic ultimatums, crying in the driveway. And then there's another version. The version that moves in silence, builds itself piece by piece, and lands so cleanly that there's no room left for anyone to claim it was an overreaction. I had spent my whole life being the person who absorbed the shock. It was time to become the one who created it, and I already had the beginning of a plan. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of calm that doesn't come from sleeping well. It comes from having made a decision. I made coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my phone. The family group chat was still humming. Patricia coordinating timelines, Robert confirming weekends, Caleb already texting, "I'll need the garage boxes first." They were planning a move-in my house, in real time. And not one of them had once asked me if this was okay. The betrayal wasn't a secret anymore. It was just a group chat thread. I didn't respond. That was the first strategic decision I made, and it was harder than it sounds. Every instinct I had, every year of training that told me to smooth things over, to manage the temperature of the room, to step in and keep things comfortable, screamed at me to type something. Instead, I took screenshots. Every message, every timestamp, every assumption laid out in plain text. I wasn't building a legal case exactly, but I was building something. A record. A paper trail that made the reality of the situation impossible to misremember later. Because the thing about families like mine is that when the story gets rewritten, it gets rewritten fast. Patricia sent 3 separate messages that week with links and suggestions. A furniture piece, a weekend to help Caleb settle in, a question about whether the Wi-Fi password was saved somewhere accessible. Each one landed on my screen like a precise declaration. We have decided, and your role is implementation. I saved every single one. I read them not with anger anymore, but with the cold focus of someone who is documenting, not reacting. There is a specific kind of power in watching people expose themselves when they think you're still playing by the old rules. They were texting logistics. I was taking notes. The most revealing message came from Robert. My dad, usually the quietest one in the system, sent me a separate text, just the 2 of us. "This will be good for everyone, Nadia. You'll see. Good for everyone." I had been humiliated by kindness before, but this landed differently because it was my father. The man who had watched this system operate for decades without once stepping in to say it wasn't fair. He wasn't cruel. He genuinely believed what he was saying, and that, the absolute sincerity of the injustice, was more shocking than cruelty would have been. I kept responding minimally. One-word answers when necessary. Thumbs-up reactions on messages I didn't want to acknowledge. I gave them just enough to believe I was still in the system, still complying, still on track to become Caleb's landlord without a lease. Meanwhile, I was doing something else entirely. The screenshots grew into a folder. The folder became a timeline, and the timeline was almost ready to be handed to someone who dealt not in feelings, but in facts. The family was planning a move-in. I was planning something much more permanent. Week 2 of my quiet plan, I went to the garage. Just me, a Saturday morning, 2 large moving boxes, and a roll of packing tape. Caleb's stuff had been living there for 14 months. 14 months of stepping around it, absorbing the small daily indignity of having someone else's past occupy my present. I didn't throw anything away. The version of revenge people imagine is dramatic. Things in trash bags, items on the curb, some big scene. This wasn't that. I packed everything carefully, labeling each box, and texted Caleb directly. I've packed your things. I need you to arrange pickup by Friday. Clean. Factual. No emotion, no explanation, no invitation for debate. He surprised me by showing up Thursday afternoon, early, irritated and in a hurry, like urgency could rewrite ownership. Then Patricia called, and I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 14 minutes long. I know because I checked the timestamp. And I didn't listen to it until the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, treating it the way I'd treat a work memo. She talked about the arrangement, about how Caleb was going through something and how she thought I understood what family meant. I deleted it, wrote down the key points on a notepad, and then I made my second call of the week. The realtor's name was Dana. I found her through a recommendation from Simone, who had described her as someone who was precise, discreet, and deeply unbothered by complicated situations. I called Dana on a Wednesday evening and told her I was interested in selling my home off-market. No sign in the yard, no public listing, no open houses. Dana asked a few questions, confirmed some numbers, and then said the kind of thing you only hear from someone who is genuinely good at their job. The less noise, the faster it moves. That sentence was almost poetic. I had been generating noise for 34 years. I was done. Dana came by Thursday morning while I was at work. She did a full walkthrough, measured rooms, photographed the light, noted the upgrades I'd made. That evening, she sent me a market analysis and a suggested off-market price. I read through it twice, made notes, asked 2 questions, and told her to proceed. There was something extraordinary about conducting the biggest financial decision of my life, with the same calm efficiency I'd give to booking a dentist appointment. The vengeance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a PDF attachment and a response time of under 24 hours. What I want you to understand about this phase is that it was not reckless. I was not acting out of pain. I was not burning my life down out of spite. Every step was calculated, documented, and reversible right up until the moment it became completely irreversible. I was protecting my self-worth in the only language the system had never heard me use before: action. Not words, not feelings. Action that existed in the real world, on paper, stamped and signed and beyond the reach of a Sunday dinner conversation. It moved fast, a cash buyer, no contingencies. I walked away with enough profit to reset my life, not wreck it. I instructed escrow not to release a forwarding address under any circumstances. No family contact, no emergency. Dana had an offer by the next Monday, and nobody in my family knew a single thing. The closing office was small and smelled like printer ink and carpet cleaner. There was a conference table, 2 chairs, a notary whose name I've already forgotten, and Dana sitting across from me with a quiet, professional calm that I found genuinely comforting. The stack of documents in front of me was thicker than I expected. Pages and pages of the life I'd built reduced to numbers and clauses and signature lines. I had read every single page the night before, twice. With a highlighter and a glass of water and the particular focus of someone who has spent too long letting other people make decisions that were hers to make. I thought about the pot roast dinner as I signed the first page. I thought about Patricia's voice, that calm, verdict-giving tone, the way she had assumed my compliance the way you assume weather. Not meanly, just absolutely. I thought about 14 months of boxes in a garage, the Wayfair link, Robert's text that said, "This will be good for everyone." I thought about all the years I had made myself small so the system could run smoothly, all the times I had prioritized everyone else's dignity above my own, all the self-worth I had quietly traded away for the privilege of being considered a good daughter, a good sister, a good support beam. And then I signed the next page. There's something almost ceremonial about a closing. Each initial is a small, deliberate act. Each signature is a line drawn in ink that cannot be undone by guilt or grief or a phone call from a mother who has a very different story about what family means. I had spent my entire adult life in a space where my decisions could be renegotiated, where my no meant push harder, where my boundaries were treated like opening bids rather than final answers. But in that room, with that notary and those documents, nothing I was doing could be undone by anyone's feelings. Not Patricia's, not Caleb's, not mine. Dana slid the last page toward me and pointed to the final signature line. I picked up the pen and held it there for just a second, not from hesitation, but from something closer to gratitude. Gratitude for the clarity that had come from a Wayfair link, of all things. Gratitude for Simone and her steady, surgical honesty. Gratitude for the version of myself that had finally, at 34 years old, decided that square footage was not worth more than sovereignty. I signed my name, clean, complete, and absolutely irrevocable. The tether was cut. I just hadn't told anyone yet. The notary stamped the documents, Dana shook my hand, and I walked out into a gray Portland afternoon with the particular lightness of someone who has just done something that cannot be undone. The system was still running, back at the family house, Patricia confirming timelines, Caleb telling people the move-in date, Robert nodding quietly at a dinner table. They were all operating on a version of reality that had just become, as of approximately 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday, completely and permanently fictional. Sunday dinner was 3 days away. I had not said a word, and I was going to let them plan every single minute of it. I found the apartment before the deal was finalized, before anyone could interfere. It was in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from my old house, close enough to keep my commute reasonable, far enough that nobody from my family would ever drive past it accidentally. I paid the deposit with money I'd saved in an account that had always been just mine, never mentioned at any dinner table, never factored into any of the family's calculations, a detail that now felt like the most important foresight I'd ever had. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty apartment for a while. Just stood there. It wasn't large, one bedroom, a small kitchen, a living area with good afternoon light, but standing in it felt like taking a full breath for the first time in years. Nobody in my family knew this address. Nobody had a key. Nobody would be calling me about Wi-Fi passwords or box pickups or furniture deliveries. The four walls around me were not a shelter from a storm. They were a declaration. And the silence inside them was not empty. It was mine. I furnished it deliberately, selectively. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted only what I had chosen. Nothing inherited. Nothing kept out of guilt. Nothing carried forward from a version of my life that no longer served me. A bed, a couch, a kitchen table for two. Books on actual shelves. A coffee maker I had picked because I wanted it, not because it was on sale or someone had gifted it at Christmas with a receipt attached. Every object in that apartment was a small act of reclaiming. Every corner was intentional. Every inch was undiluted. I moved what mattered in 2 trips. I did not give anyone the address. Not Patricia, not Robert, and absolutely not Caleb. Simone had it, written on a note card inside her kitchen drawer, because someone should always have it for emergencies, and because Simone had earned that trust. But no one else. Each person who knew where I lived was a thread that could be pulled, a door that could be knocked on, a way for the system to locate and reintegrate me. I was done being locatable by the people who had spent decades treating my life as a communal resource. The apartment was mine. The silence was mine. And Sunday dinner was tomorrow. There's a particular kind of freedom that has nothing to do with money or geography. It's the freedom of being unreachable by the people who never treated your boundaries as real. I had been lied to, cheated of my autonomy, shamed into compliance for so long that the absence of all of it felt almost disorienting, like suddenly walking on a floor that's perfectly level after years of tilting just slightly to accommodate everyone else. I made dinner in my own kitchen that Saturday night. No one knew where I was. No one was coming. And somewhere across town, a family was making plans around a house that no longer belonged to me. Tomorrow, I'd let them find out. I want to walk you through Sunday with the same precision I used to live it. I arrived at Patricia and Robert's house at the same time I always arrived. 6:15. The pot roast smell already in the hallway. The familiar layout of a family that had operated on exactly the same rhythms for 30 years. I hugged Patricia. I nodded to Robert. I sat in my usual chair. Caleb was there, more animated than I'd seen him in a while, talking about a moving company, a timeline, which boxes he wanted first. He spoke about my house with the comfortable authority of someone describing their own property. I kept my face completely neutral and helped myself to potatoes. The conversation moved the way it always did, naturally, warmly, with the particular ease of a family that believes it is functioning well because no one is currently screaming. Patricia talked about Caleb's fresh start with the tender pride she had always reserved exclusively for him. Robert said something about how Caleb could really make the space his own. Caleb nodded and talked about painting the second bedroom, my reading room with its perfect afternoon light, a different color. I ate my food, I drank my water, I let every single word land without reacting to a single one. The patience I had practiced my whole life was finally working for me. Patricia was describing a housewarming idea, something small, just family, once Caleb is settled. When I put down my fork, not dramatically, not with the weight of a movie moment. I just set it down, quietly, the way you do when you're finished eating. And I said, "There's something I should probably mention." The table shifted slightly, not visibly, but I felt it. The quality of the air changed. Patricia tilted her head in that particular way that means she is preparing to manage whatever is coming. I looked at each of them in turn. Patricia, Robert, Caleb. And then I said it. I sold the house. The closing was last Thursday. The silence lasted exactly long enough to be extraordinary. And then Caleb said, "What?" And Patricia said, "I'm sorry?" And Robert put his glass down very carefully. I had imagined this moment dozens of times, and I had been right about one thing. I had expected chaos, but I had not quite prepared for the specific quality of it. The way the shock on their faces looked almost like grief, like someone had taken something from them, which of course was precisely the point. The shocking part was not that I had done it. The shocking part was that I had done it and they had never seen it coming. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not explain myself beyond the 2 sentences that were already on the table. I let the facts stand exactly where I'd placed them, clean, irreversible, and completely beyond the reach of any guilt trip or family narrative anyone in that room could construct. The karma in that moment was not theatrical. It was administrative. And the most devastating thing about it wasn't the money or the house or the disrupted plans. It was the look on Patricia's face when she realized, for the first time in 34 years, that I had made a decision she couldn't negotiate. The conversation that followed was about to make everything even clearer. Patricia went first. Of course she did. She had always been the one to set the emotional temperature of the room. She stood up from the table, which she almost never did during dinner, and her voice went to that register I had heard maybe 4 times in my entire life. High, tight, controlled fury dressed as hurt. She said the word betrayal like she had invented it. She talked about family, about trust, about how she never expected this from me. Exactly the kind of sentence that would have unraveled me completely 6 months ago. But I had lived inside that word for so long, had been so thoroughly and quietly betrayed by the assumptions of this family, that hearing her use it about me almost felt like a compliment. Caleb's version was different. Caleb went straight to selfish, a word he delivered with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been told to manage his own problems. He said I was sabotaging his fresh start, that I knew what he was going through, that it was hard enough out there without his own sister pulling the rug. I listened to all of it. I didn't disagree, didn't defend, didn't explain. Because the thing about Caleb's version of reality is that it had always required me to be a certain kind of character. the accommodating one, the stable one, the one who absorbed, and I had just made myself unavailable for that role permanently. Robert was the one who surprised me, not with anger. Robert was never loud about anything, but with the question he asked when Patricia had temporarily run out of sentences and Caleb had finished his case. Robert looked at me very evenly and said, "What's your new address, Nadia?" Just that. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry we made you feel this way." Just, "Where can we find you now?" And in that one question, the entire system was laid bare. I had not left the family by selling the house. I had simply relocated the problem, and Robert wanted the coordinates. "I'm not sharing it," I said. He frowned like I had given a wrong answer to a simple question. Patricia started again, something about how this was extreme, and how she didn't understand why I was making things so difficult, why I always had to go to the dramatic place. Dramatic. Me. The person who had spent 3 decades being the least dramatic presence in every room I had ever occupied, who had swallowed 14 months of boxes in her garage without a single scene, who had calmly eaten pot roast and made small talk while closing on a house sale. I was the dramatic one. I let the sentence sit without arguing with it. I gathered myself and stood up from the table. Not stomping, not slamming. The quiet, unhurried movement of someone who has somewhere to be and no longer needs permission to go there. Caleb said something behind me. I didn't catch it, and I didn't ask for a repeat. Patricia said my name twice, the way she always did when she needed me to turn around and re-engage. I didn't turn around. I walked to the front door, picked up my jacket, and left mid-conversation, which was, for me, the most radical thing I had ever done in that house. I didn't explain the departure. I didn't apologize for it. I was out of the system before the door closed behind me. I want to be precise about something. I did not sit somewhere watching what happened next. I know what I know because Simone told me some of it, and because families like mine are not quiet when their infrastructure leaves. But the pieces I have are enough to understand the shape of it. The way a structure reveals its weaknesses most clearly at the moment it loses its support beam. With me gone, and my house gone, and my silence gone, the system had to find a new equilibrium, and the karmic efficiency of what followed was, I will admit, deeply satisfying. Caleb moved back into Patricia and Robert's house. Not temporarily. He had nowhere else to go, because the plan had been built entirely around my compliance, my square footage, and my historical inability to say a final no. And now all of that was unavailable. So he came home, with his boxes, with his rough patch and his fresh start, and all of the beautiful potential the family had been curating for him while I was paying my own mortgage alone. And Patricia, who had for decades expertly redirected Caleb's chaos toward me, suddenly had it back in her own living room, at full volume, with no outsourcing available. I heard from Simone that the first 2 weeks were tense, that Robert and Patricia had arguments they hadn't had in years, that Caleb's presence in the house, his hours, his noise, his expectations, was apparently more complicated to manage up close than it had been to assign to a daughter 20 minutes away. The justice in that wasn't dramatic. It was administrative, exactly the way Simone had said it needed to be. The chaos didn't disappear. It just stopped being my responsibility. It found its natural home, and the family that had shamed me into being their shock absorber was now absorbing its own. Nobody called to apologize. I want to be honest about that, because I think there's a version of this story people want where the meltdown is followed by a reckoning, where Patricia sits down somewhere quiet and sees the truth of what she did. That didn't happen. What happened instead was quieter and, in some ways, more honest. The system kept running. It just ran without me. Patricia adapted. Robert adapted. Caleb complained and was eventually told, gently, carefully, but apparently still told, to figure out a more permanent arrangement. The family drama redistributed, and not one grain of it was my problem anymore. The deepest payback isn't always witnessed. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're in the middle of a situation like this. You imagine that justice will look like watching the guilty party understand what they did. But real vengeance, the clean kind, the kind that doesn't cost you your own peace, is often invisible to you. It's happening somewhere else, in a house you used to own a piece of, with people who are discovering the weight of a thing they never acknowledged they were depending on. I had been cheated of my autonomy for decades. The interest on that debt was being paid, and I wasn't even in the room. I was somewhere else entirely, making coffee in a kitchen that no one else had a key to. The email arrived on a Wednesday. Subject line: Cora, we should talk. Except my name is Nadia. He'd mixed up my name before. It wasn't new. It was from Robert, my dad, the quiet facilitator, the man who nodded at decisions and asked for addresses, and apparently still hadn't learned to slow down long enough to spell his daughter's name correctly. I opened it, partly out of curiosity and partly because I believe in knowing what's coming, even when you've already decided it doesn't change anything. The email was 4 paragraphs long. He wrote, "I hope you can eventually see this from our perspective." That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. Not an apology, not a reckoning, just a request that I reassemble myself back into the shape the system required. He wrote about Caleb's situation with the same careful tenderness I had watched Patricia deploy for 30 years. He used the word perspective twice, both times in sentences that suggested mine was the one that needed adjusting. He did not apologize. Not once in 4 paragraphs did he write the word sorry or anything that functionally resembled it. What he wrote was a negotiation disguised as an olive branch, and I had spent enough time in this family to know the difference. I read it all the way through. I gave it the full attention it had been written to receive. I sat with it for approximately 90 seconds, long enough to confirm what I already knew, and then I pressed delete. Not out of rage, not with any particular sense of ceremony. I deleted it the way you delete a promotional email from a store you haven't shopped at in years, with the mild, clean efficiency of someone who has made a permanent decision and doesn't need to keep revisiting it. The email was gone, the folder was empty, and the space it had briefly occupied felt, this is the only word for it, cleaner. That Saturday morning, I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, the particular satisfaction of nowhere to be and no one expecting anything from me. I stood at my stove in the apartment that no one in my family had ever seen, in a kitchen that had never hosted a pot roast or a family verdict, or a Sunday dinner that ended in someone else's agenda becoming my assignment. I thought about the email briefly, not with regret, not with anger, just the mild acknowledgement of a chapter that was now closed. Robert had not apologized. That was the final piece of information I needed to confirm that I had made exactly the right choice in that closing office on a Thursday afternoon. The thing about the final cut is that it doesn't feel the way people expect it to. There's no triumph blast, no dramatic music, no moment where the world outside tilts in recognition of your right decision. There's just breakfast. There's just a quiet kitchen, the smell of toast, and the extraordinary, ordinary piece of a life that belongs entirely to you. I had been humiliated and shamed and lied to and maneuvered for so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to just exist without managing someone else's reality. Standing there with a spatula in my hand, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. And what came next was the most honest thing I'd ever understood about justice. Here's what nobody tells you about real justice. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like waking up without a weight on your chest that you got so used to, you stopped noticing it was there. It feels like coffee in a quiet kitchen where nobody is going to walk in and announce a decision about your life between the first and second sip. I had spent so long imagining that payback would look like a scene. Confrontation, revelation, the moment where the people who had taken advantage of me finally understood. And instead, it looked like this. It looked like ordinary mornings, and they were extraordinary. Karma is not always dramatic. That is the truth I wish someone had given me earlier. It is not always a public reckoning or a visible consequence. Sometimes karma is the simple, ruthless logic of a system losing the person it was built to exploit. Sometimes it's the quiet realization, happening in another house, in another kitchen, in a family that's now managing the exact chaos they once outsourced to you. That the support beam was more important than anyone acknowledged while it was holding everything up. The vengeance that lasts is not the kind you perform. It's the kind that restructures reality without asking anyone's permission. I had reclaimed something in those months that I don't have a single clean word for. It was self-worth, yes. But it was more than that. It was the right to be inconvenient. The right to make a decision that disrupted someone else's comfort without apologizing for it. The right to exist in my own life as its primary resident, not its caretaker. I had been the scapegoat, the support beam, the one who cheated herself of ease so others could have it freely. And in reclaiming all of that, with a realtor, a notary, a deposit on an apartment, and a deleted email, I had committed the most radical act I'd ever managed. I had become unavailable to people who had never earned my availability. The deepest payback is not a destroyed relationship. It's a rebuilt self. It's the version of you that walks out of a closing office on a Thursday afternoon with every initial signed and every tether cut, knowing that the system you walked out of will have to figure itself out without you. It's not infidelity of affection I had suffered. It was something more corrosive. The theft of my right to my own story, my own decisions, my own space. And the justice wasn't in watching them scramble. The justice was in no longer caring about the scramble at all. That indifference, honestly earned, is the most complete form of freedom I've ever experienced. So here I am, a quiet apartment, a kitchen that's mine, a phone that doesn't buzz with group chat logistics anymore. I built this life out of a Wayfair link and a clarity I should have found sooner, and a friend who used the word parasitic at exactly the right moment. The shocking part isn't what I did. The shocking part is how long I waited to do it. And if you are sitting somewhere right now reading this, recognizing something in it, feeling the low hum of a familiar weight in your own chest, I want you to know that the irreversible fact is available to you too. It doesn't have to be a house. It just has to be real. It just has to be yours. So let me ask you something before you go. Have you ever been the support beam? Have you ever been the one in the family who made things work, quietly, consistently, without fanfare, while someone else got the softness, the protection, the benefit of the doubt? Have you ever had a pot roast moment, that one specific instant when something so small, so ordinary, so almost absurd made it suddenly, undeniably clear that the system you were living inside was never going to change on its own? I want to know. Because the truth is, this story isn't rare. It's just rarely told this honestly. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me about your Wayfair link, whatever it was. The message, the ask, the quiet assumption that finally broke something open in you. Tell me what you did, or what you're still figuring out how to do. Tell me if you're still inside the system, or if you've already started building your own quiet exit. This space is for the people who have been cheated of their own story for too long, and the conversation below is where that changes. And if this video hit something real in you, if you felt seen, if something in your chest shifted while you were watching, then you need to be here for what's coming next. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we go deep here. We don't do surface-level takes on family drama and betrayal and the long, complicated road back to self-worth. We do the version that actually changes how you see things, the version that hands you the language for what you've been living through. The irreversible fact is just one decision away. Don't miss the next one.